Welcome to Tomorrow's People, brought to you by Personio and me, Perry Timms. We're asking the questions and bringing in the guests who have perspectives and views on a range of topical things for now and the next. I'm really pleased for this guest to come and talk to you because not only did we meet in the social circumstance of a conference in Manchester that the CIPD had put on, but we've kept in touch, we've collaborated, and we share a number of things in common. Firstly, our love of American football and music, but also the belief that we have work to do within HR and the people profession, and we have a lot of opportunities and challenges we should stand strongly in, be equitable and clear about what our outcomes are, and push ahead. Frank Douglas.
Thank you, Perry.
Well,
and if I ever need a new business development director, I'm going to hire you.
I'm on. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's over 10 years, Frank, since we first met. And it's been interesting journeys for us in that time, to use that cliche. But the Frank Douglas story, I always love to hear. So for those new to Frank Douglas and want to know a bit more about what got you here, what's the Frank Douglas story?
Oh, I wouldn't want to bore your audience with all of it, Perry, but I guess I'll start at the beginning, kind of Mary Poppins. Let's start in the beginning.
Nice.
So born in Jackson, Mississippi, deep south of the U.S., not always what I would consider the great starting point. Jackson, Mississippi, then and now, lowest reading grades in the U.S., lowest in the U.S., lowest GDP in the U.S., the hotbed and the center of gravity for the Ku Klux Klan and the Civil Rights Movement.
Right.
It's the home of one of the most terrible among many terrible stories of the Civil Rights Movement, Emmett Till, who was a 14-year-old boy who was killed for supposedly flirting with a white woman.
Story,
and if you're ever in Washington, D.C., any of you or your audience, the African American Museum, there's a whole room. His casket is there, actually. Oh. But started there. And like many Black families, my family migrated to the north.
Okay.
And we moved to New York City, to a part of New York City called the Bronx, and a part of the Bronx called the South Bronx. Yeah. Now, you would think that's a step up. Not really. Okay. The South Bronx, when I was raised there, was number one in the U.S. in murder, number one in murder, number one in arson, number one in aggregate assault, number one in rape, and number one, not number one, but 40% of the Bronx was abandoned or burnt out. Wow. And as a 18-year-old, 21-year-old Black man, you're more likely to be dead or in jail than to get a college degree. Wow. I kind of, like many parents, my mother started me on piano. Okay. And, I learned classical piano, but I realized there's no street cred in the Bronx studying Mozart and Beethoven. Right. So I switched to trumpet. And kind of excelled at trumpet and got accepted into the formal name is the Fiorello LaGuardia High School of Music and Art. Wow. Fiorello LaGuardia was a mayor of New York back in the 30s, I think. Yeah. Most people know it as the Fame School. So people like De Niro and Al Pacino were graduates, and then way down on the list was myself. I can't pick my leg up and dance on a table, but I can. And, I was a semi-professional trumpet player. As I say, we played weddings and bar mitzvahs. But as every struggling trumpet player does, I decided I better go into human resources. Okay. I went into finance first and human resources. And just to fast track, because, I can talk about that. 20 years ago or so, came to the UK. Okay. My wife was from here. I met her in New York. Right. Came over working for British Telecom as the head of strategy. Right. And then spent about 5 years or so with Shell, most of that in The Hague as their global director of exploration. And then a variety of chief people officer roles, starting with Transport for London. Mm-hmm. We can talk about that at another time. Sure. As well as a company called Mises, now called Finestra, which is a fintech company. Yep. And then the chief people officer for a company called Scottish and Newcastle, beverage and beer company. And I always say, Perry, that's the one that got away.
Oh, I bet.
I was sitting up in Edinburgh, had a fridge in my office of Newcastle Brown Ale. Oh, wow. We had a pub on the third floor. Yay. And I had a free membership to the Whiskey Club right off of Princess Street where we were. Wow, but I digress. Oh. And then for the last 7 years, I guess germane to many of our conversations today, I started Caerus Executive with my partner. Yeah. We work with companies around leadership, culture, and inclusion. Yep. we think we have a client list that any McKinsey partner would be proud of, because we're a pure play consulting firm.
Yeah.
So if you think of the 5 broadcasters in the UK, we would count 4 of them as clients.
Wow.
Think of the pharmaceutical industry, Roche, the largest. We would count Roche as a client, as well as Sanofi and Pfizer.
Nice.
Music business, 3 major music companies, Universal being the largest. We would count Universal and Warner as clients. And then it branches out from Network Rail to Royal Mail to Deliveroo to Hogan and Lovells and Lawfield Slide to M&C Saatchi to Skanska and a host of others. So I've seen the world, and I guess I have, as you would know, and I say humbly, I still have the dubious distinction, which we can get into a bit.
Yeah.
I still have the dubious distinction of being the only Black male chief people officer for a FTSE 100 company.
Wow.
There's never been before me a Black male chief people officer in the FTSE 100, and I left the corporate world about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
There's not been one since.
Wow.
That speaks to UK PLC. Speaks to HR, but I'll leave that for you to probe and for wherever you want to go with that. That's probably a little longer background on myself, but that's kind of who I am.
I think that's really important because I think the whole character of you needs to come through in these kind of things because we so often just look at the kind of job description portfolio, right? And we know there's more to people than that. I love the musicality reference and so on. And I mean, I'd have loved to thought that sometimes when you were in those board scenarios and people were talking about a product differentiation or whatever, you were like, so what?
Yeah.
Channel Miles Davis, right? But boom, Tish, I'm here all week. But really encouraging that some of those big brands are knocking on your door going, Frank, help us out.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit more about the things that they're asking for help with.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because like as you would know, and many of your audiences, starting a business is not all, peaches and cream.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
And when we started Caerus, it may sound kind of odd, but we were first movers in that we were the only consulting firm, boutique consulting firm, offering a service.
Okay.
7 years ago, what most people were doing was taking off-the-shelf products, unconscious bias training, inclusive training, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And they felt, we got this covered. Okay. We got all the off-the-shelf products that we need.
Right.
And we're saying, no, each company is unique. Yeah. It's contextual to you. Your culture is not an industry culture. You need to think about your things. And that was a tough sell.
Yeah.
What happened? I say humbly, the market caught up to us. They realized we put all those products in, and we're still not making a difference. No. So companies come to us. They have a couple of different itches, I would say. Yeah. They have hired women or underrepresented staff, and they're not keeping them. Okay. Like, oh, what happened there?
Right.
Or through their employee surveys, they realize that certain segments are scoring much lower than the dominant culture.
Okay.
And then you have some that are just enlightened.
Okay.
And realize, like software development, where, Apple releases Apple 14, they know they're working on 15. They have updates to their software, 16.0, 16.5. Yeah. There's some enlightened cultures that say, we're at culture 1.0. Yeah. Let's start thinking about 2.0. Let's not just sit on our laurels, but let's always evolve our culture like you would evolve a product. Yeah. And so there's those that are not because of any issues, but who are just like, we view this as a competitive advantage. Yeah. And so our clients, they run the scope of that. Yeah. We don't focus on diversity. And then if I can just speak to that a little bit, because one of the things I've learned in this is that people actually confuse and conflate diversity and inclusion.
Nice, yeah.
And what you find in many companies is you ask them an inclusion question, you get a diversity answer. So if I ask a client, if I ask the CEO, tell me what your company's doing around inclusion, they'll say, well, we've increased the number of women by X%. We got more people of color in this grade level than we have. And we got a entry-level graduate scheme program where we focused on, increasing underrepresented groups. And I'm like, no, that's diversity.
Yeah, nice.
And the challenge with inclusion, and this where it would be interesting, Perry, to get your thoughts, it's actually transformation. Yeah. It is challenging the basic assumptions of how you do things because the reality is, in most organizations, the decision makers are at the top of the pyramid and the underrepresented groups tend to be at the bottom of the pyramid. And so if you continue making your decisions just at the top of the pyramid, you've left money on the table. You haven't gotten the return on investment. You haven't unlocked the benefits, whichever way you want to go, of diversity.
Yeah.
And so one of the biggest challenges to inclusion is hierarchy.
Yeah. Yeah, I recognise that and I'd agree with that because I am stated as a bit anti-hierarchical for all sorts of reasons.
Yes.
And I do have the philosophy that if you create an environment where there is equity in power and the dispersal of and decision-making and so on, it should be a natural consequence. It creates more inclusion.
Yeah.
Now, what I recognise
Yes.
is that we all hold some lived experiences, biases, misunderstandings, right? And we sometimes are a bit clumsy or a little bit deliberate, and it can be still exclusive.
Yeah.
So I see it, and I'm a bit like you when it came to those off-the-shelf tools, right? So I took an unconscious bias test, and I'm not afraid to say this. I did all right, which I felt very good about, right? However, I did question myself going, was I really true with those answers, or did I think I was being tested?
Did they test your reaction to the Green Bay Packers? Did they flash that on you?
No.
Because that would have shown all your biases.
Total acid test, exactly that, exactly that.
Yeah.
I came out as being kind of overcompensating for people with disabilities, and I had a bit of a paranoia about that, thinking, what patronising rubbish am I doing? Anyway, so that didn't take me that far, but what has taken me into an area where I'm much more aware of it is the conversations I've had with people about lived experiences and the put the foot in moments and the step back because you're not sure moments. I'm like, whoa, what have I been doing?
Yes.
And so that's where I think hierarchies just create a whole different closed shop view on that. Yeah. I'm with you on that.
Yeah. And part of the issue is that, I know I will rankle some people in this profession, but D&I has a huge overlap to HR.
Yeah,
there's a view out there that, you do D&I, but, part of why I think we have the client list we have, and make a plug, we've been shortlisted for Personnel Today for the HR Consultancy of the Year.
Very nice. Good.
And it's because it's about culture change. You and I know that, culture change involves changing the context of an organization. You just can't be an advocate. You just can't be passionate. You need to understand the tools of that context, reward, leadership, behavior, structures, all HR levers. And I think part of why we've been successful is that we approach it as a change program, as a transformation program.
Yeah. I guess that's revelationary in some respects. Clearly not to you, because you are thinking about the whole system. And this whole shift and transformation to me means you'll never be the same again. And I guess that's what you're doing, is you're saying there's a line in the sand and there's a future, and that future has to be more inclusive, because we've got to start with things like the behaviours and the artifacts that we recognise that could symbolise certain things and restrictions, right? So I think this is where it gets sometimes people in knots, because they're like, oh, it's too complicated. I've got too many data points. I don't quite know where to settle on it. Do you get that? Do you get people saying, here you go, Frank, here's the whole bucket of complexity? Okay.
Yeah, it's too difficult. And but part of that, a slight segue brings us to the HR profession itself.
Right, yeah, good.
Because I say respectfully, so I've been here 20 years now, so I know before I'm about to insult someone, you always say respectfully in the UK. So with all due respect to the HR profession, the HR profession is part of the barriers. And if I just stick on the D&I topic for a second, and then I'll move away from that, is the problem is that the role of HR in many organizations is to justify and maintain this myth of meritocracy. They've put in the policies, the program, the procedures, and their role in many ways is to protect the myth of meritocracy.
Well put.
Anyone focusing on D&I, their role is to challenge the myth of meritocracy. And that's where the clash is. That's where the clash is. And so, to me, I always tell someone, that you'll never get a straight answer to this. But if you were to get a straight answer, all you need to do ultimately is ask your CEO or your chief people officer, do you believe in the myth of meritocracy? That is, that able-bodied, heterosexual white men are the most capable in the world. You'll never get a straight answer to that, but the fact is, some of them believe yes.
Exactly that.
And that's your starting point in this whole conversation.
It really is. And I know Nilofer Merchant's work turned my view of meritocracy on its head a bit, because she said everywhere you go, it is a myth. It's used to deflect from the uncomfortable things
Yes.
that need to be surfaced and worked through, right? So I really like that. And I kind of had a belief on meritocracy, and this talks to what you're saying there. It's like, but I held that so strongly. I believed that if you had the endeavor and the effort and the results and the network and everything else, you should be ordained as worthy, right?
Yeah.
And then she turns it on its head, and I'm like, whoa. However, I totally got what she said. It's like, but your meritocracy is governed by what game you're playing and who's playing, setting the rules
Absolutely.
for it, right? Yeah. And then my belief, and this is, again, what I want to touch on with you, actually, Frank, because you've sparked this in me. My belief then was both shattered and reassembled in a way that I felt much more comfortable with.
Yeah.
And I do want to touch on that, because I don't believe every belief we have is an unmovable rock of an object.
Yes.
Is that how you would see it? Or?
I think they beliefs and values can be changed. But again, if you go back to principles of transformation and change, is that you got to change the context.
Right.
And so what happens in many cases, I'll take one kind of case, is that an organization will send their employee out to a inclusive leadership program or an accelerator program, which I hate the term.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And then bring them back and think, okay,
Done.
Well, first off, it's not the employee that needs to be fixed.
No.
But the bigger issue is that they haven't changed the context.
Totally
and so, my simple analogy is like sending someone to a non-smoking course and then bringing them back to a house of smokers. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, exactly that, right? Social norms, etc.
Exactly. And so, what you find is inclusion. It's a word thrown around by everyone. There are very few actually focused on inclusion. What most are focused on are assimilation.
Assimilation, that's a good word.
And that's the challenge and why the dial hasn't, because what they've done is that let's put in programs and systems that are going to get these new diverse thinking and minds up to speed very quickly with how we do things here.
Right,
As opposed to them really, and that's the transformational part, figuring out how can we challenge the underlying assumptions of our system, de-bias them, to move our systems closer to this population we've recruited. And most companies are not taking that transformation approach. It's more of an information approach. It's more of a assimilation approach. But HR is right in the middle of that.
Assimilation, I think, is a really strong word, so I want to bring that out, because you've just made me flash back, and also just to what I'm hearing and picking up, that's not a word that's used enough about that kind of stuff. I don't want to create it as a totally dirty word, but I do want it to be upper mind in our conscious, right? So thank you for that. And I go back to times when I've worked with employers, and I worked with civil service quite some time, right? And it introduced staff networks. As a result, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and systemic racism. Now, to me, being brought up in multicultural, believe it or not, Northampton, and I say believe it or not because not everybody would have said that. I was in a class with people from Jamaica, Barbados, Pakistan, Kenya, Canada, Israel, Yugoslavia at the time, Ireland, even Sri Lanka, I remember. Right? And so I thought it was a norm, right, that you were with people from different heritages and so on. They were second generation. Parents came over the Windrush in some examples. And I used to feel like, I want to know what's going on here. So, when you're 12 and stuff, you probably aren't socially aware, and you ask questions like, how come? And what I got back was some brilliant answers. They really, really. So when I saw networks coming in, I was kind of thinking, oh, okay, so this is what I experienced at school, coming into the workplace in a way that raises the consciousness, because I saw the attachment to the systemic racism agenda at the time, and I got very attached to those networks. And of course, we now would call them employee representative groups, right? But that was a long time ago.
Yes.
And we're still doing it, right?
We're still doing that. And, I'm not sure if I'll be up in Manchester for the CRP, but, I have no doubt that there'll be a company, unfortunately, who'll say, look at what we're doing. We have employee resource groups, and we've done some inclusive leadership training for our team, and, we're on top of it. But yes, it like I say, there's still a product mentality. And that sense of challenging the myth of meritocracy. meritocracy.
Yeah.
It still is one HR runs from.
You've made me think about that as very chintzy, almost like just like the crockery you never use. You know what I mean? It's like,
well, it's a starting point and it's good, but it is not the whole journey.
Yeah.
It's not the whole journey.
Now,
it's the easy part.
Sorry, I love this transformation kind of feel that you're talking about there, because in my mind, all I can now see is how could we be, both in performance sense and in a relational sense, and then the opportunity and and just the egalitarianism of it all, right? I mean, again, I'm an optimist and I go to that. And whilst I like to think that's possible, clearly the fact that you're so busy means it's not there yet, right?
No. Yeah, partly it's about the language and the framing. Right. And so I've been privileged to work with 3 CEOs, give or take, in my lifetime as their chief people officer.
Yeah.
Don't hold me to this literally, but there's 3 things I think is on every CEO's mind.
Yep.
If they're in a traded company, particularly.
Okay.
If they're in a traded company, there's 3 things on their mind that you have to, and HR, so it's not just about D&I, you have to plug into. So the first thing that's I think is on every CEO's mind is value creation.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in a traded company, value creation, you live and die by, because in fact, your bonus is probably tied to total shareholder return.
Yeah.
So value creation is on every CEO's mind in my view. The other is organizational blind spots, because that's really your strategy. Yeah. What is it we're not seeing around the corner? And that's what, that's what you deal in so passionately, is that future. What are we not seeing around the corner? So organizational blind spots, you do, every CEO does. Yeah. And then the last thing, again, particularly in a public traded company, that they focus on is alpha performance. We have to outperform our competitors, because in the investment world, beta performance is your fund is trading to the average. Alpha performance, you're outperforming the markets and your competitors. There is no company where the CEO gives his key objectives, his or her key objectives, average objectives. It's like, oh, Perry, for 2023, you just do average. Yeah. No. You need to outperform, everyone else. So value creation, organizational blind spots, and alpha performance. We as HR, whatever we do, we can't just be talking about HR stuff. We got to figure out, how do we plug into one of those 3 things? It could be D&I, it could be about talent. And so if I just comment, because I've worked in the UK and here, one of the big differences I find is I've yet to go to an HR presentation on anything where the reason they gave for doing something was, we believe this will create competitor advantage. Yeah. I've never heard the word competitor advantage in any presentation as the basis for why we do things. Because ultimately, what we should be doing as HR is having the competition fear us.
I know what you mean.
It's like, oh, Jesus, Perry and that team over there in the widget company, what are they going to do next? Because they, they keep beating us to the market on people and talent and resources. And so, even HR is not focused on alpha performance, which drives the company's alpha performance. I've never heard, and you go to a lot of things, when's the last time you heard competitor advantage is why we're doing this?
The only thing I can talk to is where people put the fictional war for talent in as the enemy, right? And so it doesn't, employee value proposition and brand stuff can sometimes talk to, but they sort of seem to demonize the talented individuals as like, we've got to get their choice. Not, we've got to be better than them, because the choice will happen naturally, right? Yes. You've really pulled 3 strong things there. But they absolutely are critical. And value creation, let's get this right. I've just come off a podcast, a webinar talking about this. It's not just the financials, is it?
No.
It's much bigger than that,
yes.
right? Yeah.
Well, you got to realize, not you, but you realize, and what leaders need to realize is that human resources and financial resources are very similar in one way.
Right.
And that is, they both gravitate to the highest rate of return.
Okay.
And so that's what you got to be focused on, is that as from a talent and HR point of view, you got to provide me and your employees the highest rate of return, because that's what finance is.
Yeah.
Money moves to the highest rate of return, as we've seen in the markets.
Exactly.
We need to really embed that, and people still don't get that, which is the competitive advantage, is that talent, human resources, also similar to financial resources, moves to the highest level of return. And we just don't always focus on it from that point of view.
I feel like you've come up with a philosophical, almost Obama-esque drop the mic thing there, because I hadn't created the same kind of magnetic force to people in the way that you just did, because that higher rate of return isn't just financial.
Yeah,
is it?
I mean, you
It's
can,
well-being,
whatever it is,
everything,
exactly.
Isn't it?
Exactly.
And it's really funny how I think we're tapping into both emotion in human beings and cognition in human beings.
Yeah.
Because those two things will need to combine to make that choice, right?
Yes.
So that I love. The value creation bit I absolutely love, because I'm really advocating, Frank, for a broader palette on what we look at when we talk about value and people.
Yeah.
Because I think some of the tension behind why people haven't lent in more avidly to being more equitable and inclusive is because they're kind of thinking we're doing all right.
Yeah.
Optics, let's keep that bit right.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
They haven't felt the performance kick in the groin
Yes.
to want to do it. But you know that actually the more diverse, inclusive and
absolutely
equitable you are, the better you are all around, right?
And unfortunately, Perry, what we've seen and what I've seen in companies, inside and out, is that companies tend to only do things when they have to.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate, because, I look at before COVID.
Yeah.
There was a headline, I think it was Unilever. There was a headline that Unilever was piloting flexible working in New Zealand.
Remember it.
New Zealand. And they were piloting flexible working.
Yeah.
They didn't really want to do it. No. I had a client who was going to pilot flexible working in one of their divisions.
Right.
They didn't want to do it. COVID made them do it.
Yeah.
And so, everyone, future of work is hybrid and remote. My cynical side says, as we move further away from it and back to the norm, they will default back to where they were 4 years ago, which is, we don't have to do this. I like to see my battalion outside my office and presentism. And similar is how the ED&I agenda, particularly the race agenda, wasn't until May 26, 2020. Exactly. They had to do it.
Yeah.
No one wanted to really talk about race before then. Believe me, it was part of my business model.
Yep.
And everyone talked about it for a year or so. And as we move further and further away, unless there's another reason for a huge intervention, it'll start dropping down. So there's a challenge there that even, which, as I say, is why sometimes you have to frame it within those three areas, because sometimes, the inertia, is physics. It will stay, not in motion.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to think about it as a sort of physics-based calculation, or even a quantum physics calculation, which blows my mind all the time. But I totally get what you're saying there, because I suppose when people are reflecting on, oh yeah, we did, didn't we then? But that means we're not quite so avid on it now.
Yeah.
And they'll go, but that's because Ukraine war, the cost of living, and they'll just create a stack of problems, won't they? And just go, well, it's one of many. So, what would you do if you were me? But the inverse of that, I think, is what you're talking to from some of your clients who want to go to version 2.0 and 3.0, right?
Yes.
That's the stuff where it's like, that's how you get on top of this.
Yes,
cluster.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, because they're all competing for resources and their supply chain. They're competing for talent, and everyone will tell you, skilled talent is an issue we have a challenge with. Well, start looking at alpha performance and all those aspects. And so, in my long career, it was only in 2003. For about 9 months, I worked for one manager. I learned more in that 9 months than I learned every year before then.
Wow.
I was sent to The Hague with Shell. I must have upset someone, because they put me with the meanest, the toughest oil man that they had.
Okay.
And so, if they had a problem in Brunei, they sent him. If they had a problem in Nigeria, he was to fix it. If they had a problem in Oman, he fixed it.
Okay.
And they said, you go be his HR director. And he wasn't a big fan of HR folks on top of that. And I'm like, okay, what did I say at that party 6 months ago? Brian basically, he basically opened up every meeting. I mean, this is his leadership team, petroleum engineers, the finance people, basically with the mantra, who has barrels on the table for me? Oil company. And that was his view. Who has barrels on the table? And so I learned in those 9 months, I can't come to him and talk about centralization or decentralization. I could come and say, we have too many petroleum engineers on that one asset, and we're duplicating the efforts in those 5 assets. If we centralize this one, we can reduce the costs. We could possibly increase production, and we can make the organization more efficient. Here's my barrel on the table, Brian. And I was, okay, let's talk about that. And so I learned that, every HR person needs to find out what their equivalent barrels on the table is.
Nice phrase, like it.
And plug into it. Don't speak to your CEO as you do to the HR folks in Manchester. Find out what their barrels on the table are. And plug into that, and use that as your rationale. So that whole commercial part of value creation, we need to learn the equivalent of barrels on the table in our organizations.
Because that's the alpha performance thing. And that's the value creation, as you say. I mean, it absolutely talks to the top and tail of your messaging there. But all too often, that seems to be out of reach, not in mind, and I'm still flabbergasted by it. I remember, like you will, the CIPD's business savvy agenda. Do you remember that? And I think it had massive intent, and I think it did start to put a little spark in some people's minds about actually don't forget that that's what you're doing it for. Because I think we had got lost a bit. Both in identity and in role and purpose and so on.
This podcast is brought to you by Personio. Personio is the all-in-one HR solution for now and the future. We help HR teams recruit, onboard, manage, pay, and develop employees more efficiently. And our easy-to-use solution works across every part of the employee lifecycle. Automate your people processes and gain time back for more impactful work, like creating your people strategy. After all, everything starts with people. To find out what Personio can do for you and your business, head to personio.com. That's PERSONIO.com.
Now, I have seen, and in fact, on this podcast series, we've got a few people acutely aware of that. And that gives me hope. But it still feels like it's an exception rather than a rule, right?
Now, here's the other side of this. We can't do that because I think part of what we've lost as a profession is our core reason for being, which is the employee advocate. Still, that foot in the door. That we sometimes as a profession need to be and do. I think we've lost that a bit. And I know I speak to, HR professionals and they're like, part of the problem is, someone filed a grievance and the HR people actually sided with the managers. They're always siding with the manager or whatever the case may be. And part of what I think has happened, with all due respect.
Here we go.
Is I think HR is suffering a little bit from the Stockholm syndrome. I think we have, the language for the last 10 to 15 years is we want to be business partners. We want to have a seat at the table. We're not, in fact, you have some of our senior people saying, I'm not an HR person, I'm a business person. And so we've tried to get in good and be liked and kind by... I won't say the captors, but there's a sense of a Stockholm syndrome there.
I get it.
That when it comes to being the employee advocate and being the lone voice in the room, I think we possibly sometimes give that up in favor of I'm a business person and I want to be liked by the business.
I totally get what you mean by that, and I've seen that, and I could testify to that too. There's an almost liminal space there of like not belonging anywhere really, and desperately trying to please in some respects. But I really do recognise the employee advocacy bit is strong, and my hope, and again I do hope a lot actually. I ought to back it up sometimes with strategies, but I do my best. Is that vehicles like inclusion in the absolute truest sense of the word, and the performance agenda in balance with ESG type commitments, right, might give us a chance to find a space where we can stand more firmly in as agitator, architect, and you know, I just reckon there's a paradoxical thing that we're just not comfortable enough with. I don't know whether that's a view you share, but I'm starting to think that now. We ought to talk like that. Yeah.
Well, you know, we talk about, and I think even the CIPD is not to slag off the CIPD, but I think in the professional map, there's a value around courage.
Yes.
Which I find kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
The Army doesn't even have a value of courage.
You know,
the Army doesn't recruit people and say you got to be courageous.
Yeah, good point.
It's an output
of
belief and purpose and mission. So I find that interesting. But the other thing is, you know, I define courage when I was hiring someone. You know, courage to me is give me an example of where you championed an unpopular cause. That to me is courage in a professional sense.
What you did there,
And if you ask that to a lot of people, you know, champion something in the unpopular cause, 9 people in the room and you're the one still over there, but you've championed your cause. That's courage.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, if HR people can give examples of that and build more examples of that, then we're on the right path. But we got to continue. We got to make sure that part of our role is champion the unpopular cause.
It's funny, you know, because the CIPD have a series of videos about that, and I talk about it. I'm the face of that. But just to kind of back myself out of that corner, my sense was the influence piece.
Yeah.
And I was deliberately trying to say to people, don't be apologetic about being in HR. And actually what I should have said is that bit that you just talked about backing the unpopular stuff. Because there is this thing about business ethics, isn't there?
Yes.
And sometimes it feels like HR have got to play that card really, really strongly.
Yes.
And other times professionals will go, it's not my responsibility to do that. So, but who's the conscience there? And conscience must come into the work you're doing around inclusion and stuff.
Yeah, but conscience and courage can cost you your job.
Yeah.
And I've been there. I lost my job because of courage.
Right.
It was back in New York. I was the chief people officer for a real estate company.
Okay.
The chairperson wanted us to hire her nephew, I believe it was, who was not qualified, and we had a very qualified internal candidate. I said no to it. And then she tried to cherry pick. She went to the operations MD, who they would have been working, and said, would you hire him? He said no. Went to the chief marketing officer, said no. Went to the CEO, said no. Right. She fired the whole leadership team.
Wow.
Fired the whole leadership team because we wouldn't hire this individual. That's what courage can get you. So just, you know, when people talk about courage, realize you can lose your job over courage. Now, we got reinstated 5 months later. But courage and you know, it's not to be taken lightly in the HR profession and conscious because, you know, doing the right thing doesn't come without cost. And so I always caution people when they talk about it, you know, realize, you know, the flip side of doing the right thing you may end up on the wrong side of that. So there's just a practical, you know, aspect to that.
Yeah, there's definitely traps to avoid, right? And sometimes cliches. And I talk about word confetti a lot on LinkedIn. Some of these things drive me nuts. When people kind of say, "Oh, just go and find something you love," it's like I'm not sure the last time I could cash in some love to get my coffee. So, but the commercial thing is an interesting thing because I recall some research that said diversity diverse boards and more inclusive approaches have equaled commercial success. There's almost been some causal trails. Either McKinsey tried it and or published it, and others have done that. I mean, is that a necessary thing, you think, that we have to create that explicit a kind of, look, your money goes up if you... Do you know what I mean? Do we have to do that, or what?
Well, again, if I reduce this down to hard, cold language of the business, it's about your return on investment.
So, yeah.
I mean, so if you've invested in this talent, you can leave it, or you could try to unlock the value in it.
There you go.
And so it's a ROI. I hate to be that cold-hearted business person, but from an organization, why are you doing this? I mean, so and that's the fundamental question. Are you doing this just to be performative for the optics, or are you doing this because you think there's value to it? And if there's value to it, then unlock it. If you're doing it just to be performative, as many companies are, they have not even thought about how do we unlock it. We just know it's there.
I can see a kind of a meme with performative and performance, because they're so similar, right?
Yeah.
And there's something really powerful about that. And the questions you want to ask yourself about, like you say, the why, the whole rationale behind it, the emotiveness and the humanity, I suppose.
Yeah. You know, in a world we love, Perry, imagine you had 6 number 1 draft picks sitting on the bench versus them starting on the field.
Exactly that.
You know, who do you think's unlocking the value of their investment? Well, exactly, all things being equal, and that's what many companies are. They have their top round draft picks sitting on the bench.
I know. It seems an absolute travesty.
We drafted some good talent from good places.
But did you deploy it? Like you said, did you unlock it? So there is a lot of unlocking, and I think there is something about the strategy that an organization has, and perhaps how that trickles through to business plans and therefore activities. Do you think that there's something we can do in the artifact narration side of organizations that could bring more of this to a more kind of conclusive and positive and action-oriented thing? Yeah. Some
of the work we've done with many. Some of the work with many. I'm not sure that's the right iteration, but work we've done with many of our clients is we call it a strategic narrative or different branding.
Yeah.
And we help them bring the issue of diversity and inclusion into their business plan.
Great.
Because many of them see HR, diversity, whatever it may be, as something over here. And I saw even, just in my HR days, HR is something I do in my spare time. Yeah. I just need to run my business. Yeah. Well, if you can show that, embedding this into your business will help you deal with some of your objectives and some of your challenges even more so, then a light bulb goes off and then the journey is really starting. So until they have that time to reflect and think about, how do I bring this into my business objectives? It becomes difficult. So if it's in the music industry and, they realize, a major music stream for us is hip hop and R&B, and I need to understand that audience. That's a perspective that's important. It becomes part of, the air they breathe. Exactly. It's not separate. And like I say, every organization has their equivalent, their barrels on the table. You have to bring it into that. You have to bring it into that.
And so that's reassuring for me, because I think there is something about declarations, but also then the really strong sense that they aren't just rhetorical positioning. And we hear about people purpose washing, and I'm sure there are people EDI washing, like you say, for optics and for the right thing. But it's the translation into everyday and noticeable things, right? So we've got to pick up signals, haven't we, about this? And I love to think that there's some way we can get better at this kind of infinity loop type of thing, where it's like we declare, we do, and then people go, yes, it's made a difference, but, and it kind of loops back in, so it shapes it. And I don't know whether your work with clients does this almost like, this is how you can make it sustainable. So it's not just a kind of peak and then it disappears and then it peaks again with the next crisis. That must drive you nuts.
The biggest multiplier in all of this, but it's not just in D&I, it's in HR. The biggest multiplier is the CEO.
Right.
Is that, I always say, what interests my boss fascinates me.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, nice.
So, the CEO has to make it part of their agenda, part of their business plan, their strategy.
Yeah.
So, the bankers, notwithstanding and all their sins, if you ever looked at J.P. Morgan Chase and Jamie Dimon.
Yes.
Jamie, to me, because people always say, "Who's doing it right in the UK?" And I struggle in the UK. But say, look at Jamie Dimon and J.P. Morgan, and even on an analyst call where it's pretty quantitative.
Yeah.
Jamie will weave into it just the diversity strategy, what they're doing. You look at their website, you look at their business plan. They have. It's a U.S. thing, but he has a recruiter who's in charge of recruiting Black talent.
Okay, right.
And I think they may have even been advertising for one of those in the UK also.
Yeah.
He's very explicit about it.
Right.
It's part of his business plan. It's part of everything he does. You need the CEO to, for lack of a better term, have a come to Jesus moment, as we would say in the South. And, once the CEO grabs it, engages with it, the multiplier effect, it'll fascinate his or her leadership team and on the way down.
Right.
So you put in every program, every initiative you want, but unless you got the CEO in that town hall, in those moments of truth, who really believes it's important to their business saying it, it tends to suffer and go up and down.
Yeah, that's
so
it.
The CEO has to believe it, and that's where our effort is
to try and create that kind of constant exponentiality rather than and you really reminded me there that there are times with things like sustainability is one, talent mobility is another, race and inclusion and disability and gender and everything else that has a form of kind of categorization. We kind of need to make a thing of it, but then we don't, if that makes sense. And again, it's another paradox, isn't it? Because if we don't make a thing of it, it seems to dissipate. And then some people say, but you're making too big a thing of it. It's like, what? We kind of need to hear it and feel it until such point as maybe there is in the future. I don't know when that is, where we can never say it's done, of course, but it's almost like, but perhaps we just don't need to be as differentiated about it anymore. I don't know. Do you see a point where you would love to sit back and kind of go, well, at least they've got it and that's replicating? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I hope for that.
Right.
I think the winners will be who get to the point before they have to.
Exactly that.
Imagine a FTSE company back in 2019 saying all our employees can work from home 3 days a week, 4-day week. Imagine, any FTSE company in 2019 saying we're going to let our employees work from home, where they would be in the talent race. So whatever that next, destination is, be it about leadership, be it about D&I, be it about inclusion, be it about empowering employees, whoever can get there before they have to, will be the winner.
It will, won't it? And that, you hope, becomes not just a cut and paste, but an exemplar of people to do what you said right at the outset of this, contextualize it to them.
Yeah, no, it's not a cut and paste.
No.
We've had the privilege of working, like I said, with 4 of the 5 broadcasters. We've been behind the curtain. And I could tell you, it's not an industry issue in terms of talent.
Right.
It's contextual to each one of them. The BBC's challenges are not the same as ITV or Channel 4's or Paramount Plus.
Right.
Why would they be? They have different leadership. They have different HR policies, different cultures. It's not the same. So you wouldn't be able to cut and paste something from the BBC into Paramount Plus, for example.
I think that's reassuring, because I hear a lot of people saying, I've seen what they do and that's what I'm going to do. Right? And I do kind of have one of those wobbly moments where it's like, oof, good luck with that.
But again, that goes back to where's our alpha performance mindset. By just doing what everyone else does, it's beta performance.
It is,
and what I find too much in HR is that it's beta performance. We are very good followers. And maybe fast followers.
Yeah, sure.
But we're not willing to be leaders in doing it to shake up the competition.
I think there's a couple of real strong themes that I'm moving around in my mind now to kind of go, perhaps I've got something now where I can stand more firmly in it, because I've now created a stronger association with transformation being the absolute thing that you do, and included within that
Yes.
is how you equalize and include and bring all those things that I think we want to be fair to all about.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And then I think there's something lovely about the kind of constantness of it, paying attention to it in a way that I guess we see the energy companies having safety briefings every day, whether
Yes.
you need it or not, right?
Yeah.
It's like, we just do it. Why'd you do it? Because if we don't do it, the one day we don't do it is when we might
Yeah.
need it, and we won't remember
Yes.
it. So I am less bothered now about making a thing out of it versus having it so that you don't need to make a thing out of it.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because
Yeah.
I've used that analogy, particularly in those process industries that I work with,
Okay.
is that they need to treat emotional and mental safety the same way they treat physical safety.
Oh, hang on to that. Oh,
And
that's
in those companies that have a strong safety culture, that resonates. That resonates. You know, so why would you not treat mental and emotional safety the same way? Physical safety says, if I see something wrong on that rig, I can shut the rig down. I can call it out.
Yeah.
Well, create a culture where emotionally and mentally, if you see something wrong, you can shut it down, shut the rig down, call it out. Very easily translation to say, you know, treat physical and emotional safety the same way you treat physical safety.
Super powerful, isn't it? Because I mean, it's all encompassing for a start. So it doesn't denominate it in any way, but actually, it's the thing that it creates, in the sense of, I can do this. Right? At an individual level.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Why? You know, you don't want anyone going home at the end of their workday with any physical harm.
Exactly.
You don't want them going home with any mental or emotional harm.
I mean, wow, it talks to everything, Frank, well-being wise and so on, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, well, there's a couple of, I won't call them secret weapons here, because they're not a secret now you've revealed them, but they are kind of big ticket.
Yeah, I've given away all my IP here to you there, Barry. I don't know what I'm going to do for a living now.
However, what I understand from the world out there is, there's a lot more for a start. But equally, like, as you say, the context is really, really important. And I guess what you are doing, so I'm almost kind of wrapping up a little bit here, is what you're doing when you're going into those organizations is you are kind of absorbing quite a lot of their culture and their essence, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that's shaping your worldview and how you deal with things anyway.
Yeah, I just, when I speak, Perry, I just say it's just lessons from the battlefield.
That's it.
It's not academic. It's not a book.
Yeah.
I'm in the trenches.
Yeah.
You know, I'm having the live experience with employees. I'm one-to-one with the senior execs. And it shapes me, and hopefully I give something back through that absorption.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, it's I've been out there.
Nice. So you must be on like Frank 16.2 or something now, right? But I actually love this thought that, again, it comes to what I said earlier on about beliefs and stuff. It's people say you can't change your beliefs. It's like, you know what, there'll be circumstances that will mean you have to reassemble them in a way that's commensurate to what's needed. But I think there is something really nice about us being upgradable in the nicest possible sense.
Yes.
Learning our way into and out of things that aren't helpful to us and other people. And just the tuning and the signaling and the sensitivity and the calling out and the holding the interests of others in mind.
Yes.
That I think it's almost like that to me sounds like what being a human is all about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. You have to, yeah. I mean, I probably, this probably will not resonate with 3/4 of the audience.
Okay.
But there we go. Yeah. It's an American football analogy.
Okay.
And I use it, and then I try to explain it, which defeats the point of using it. But I say, you know, business is like American football. You go up to the line, and as a quarterback, there are times you have to call an audible.
Yep, I know what that means.
You have to say, okay, this isn't what we planned. Let's change direction.
Yep.
And I think the agile company is the ability of an organization and a leadership on a day-to-day basis, month-to-month, year-to-year basis. The winners will be those who are able to call an audible.
Oh, yeah.
Change the play, because the assumptions have also changed, as opposed to let's just go straight ahead with this because that's the way we planned it. And I think that's where HR needs to be also.
Oh, I love that. I'm just going to pull on that a little bit, because that requires the people in and around that to know what their role has now shifted to as a result of that audible.
Exactly.
Right? And if we're HR and that audible is in a particular dynamic, we know we're either going to run a route that's got a particular kind of nature, or we're going to block somebody from doing what we don't want them to do. So
we're probably the only two people who understand that.
We are. We absolutely are.
But
wow,
people need to expand their cultural lexicon. So I'll let them go out there. It's been great.
Do you know who popped into my head when you said that? Lionel Manuel. Now that's a giant name from the past, right? That was the Phil Simms, Mark Bavaro era. Joe Morris, what a running back. But I always liked Maurice Carthon as the best blocking fullback I'd seen in a long time. Right, so we're going to end on an NFL metaphor, and we've actually shared a couple of NFL experiences, and I've enjoyed those, Frank. But I haven't enjoyed any of that until this. That has very nicely blown my mind and actually soothed and sparked my soul in equal measure. And it's funny, because the word soul means a lot to me because of the music I like, but I also love the human soul. So when I say soulful, it's the ultimate accolade. That's the most soulful exchange I've had in a long time, Frank. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Very kind. And thanks for inviting me on.